started. All right, warriors, I am bringing an amazing guest, as I just introduced for you. And I gotta say, I am already loving this interview because we just started with some music to get us in the mood, to have a conversation about the mood. This is wonderful. Welcome to the Love Your Life show, Dr. Sonia Wright.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Susie. I'm so excited to be here. I really am so excited. This is so much fun.
This is so great. Could you tell the listeners a little bit about how you got to where you are, an intimacy and sex coach for women in their midlife?
Sure. So I'm Dr. Sonia Wright. I'm the midlife sex coach for women. I help women own and embrace their sexuality and express their unique sexual identity and just have fun with it all, right? And how in the world, and I should say, I'm like a life coach, just like you. I'm a sexual counselor. And I'm a medical doctor. I'm a pediatric radiologist. So how does a pediatric radiologist go from being like the x-ray doctor to the sex coach, right?
I love that. I know. The question comes up. It's like radiology, pediatric radiology.
Like the short answer is like, it's all done in the dark, right?
There you go.
And then the long answer is more like, I started off deciding I wanted to give something back when I was about 46, 48 years old. And I started to decide I wanted to be a life coach. And then I went and I got training as a life coach through the Life Coach School and through Learning Journeys. And I was a physician life coach. And while I was doing that work, it kept coming up again and again about intimacy issues. And people assume because I was a doctor that I would have an understanding of this stuff. And I was going through similar problems myself, right? It's like the shame of the life coach that can't sort out her
like, I shouldn't be crying. Gosh, darn it.
And I was kind of like, I'm supposed to have this all together. I'm supposed to raise the kids, have a great relationship, work a demanding job, and have the intimacy in there as well. And I didn't. And I suffered for a long time before I decided to go and get some help. And then after I went and got the help that I needed, I realized that there's probably a lot of women out there that were dealing with this issue and nobody was talking about it. And so I went and trained as a sexual counselor. And I incorporated the sexual counseling into my life coaching, and then realized at that time I was doing physician life coaching, but realizing that it was something that every woman needed access to. So then I opened my practice to just any woman that needs it. But I do have a focus on midlife because I love that time of life. It's fabulous. This is where you get to choose who you want to be, what you want to do with your life. This is when it becomes a little bit more about you.
For sure. Yeah. I absolutely adore that. And I know for me in midlife, I was able to put aside, or at least become aware and then work to put aside some of the limiting beliefs that had been, sort of passed down to me by society and growing up as a girl in this society, and what good girls do and what good girls don't do.
Yeah.
And getting to, the midlife is very interesting because you sort of get to an effort point where you're just like, come on. I want some fun here.
I think it's like an internal thing. You're like, I've had enough. Is this all there is to life? I've got to figure this out. And at the same time, society doesn't have a role to put you in anymore. There's not this need to control you. They don't know what to do with midlife women and women, older than 45. They don't know where to put us. And so they just kind of let us go and do our own thing, So it becomes a fun time.
It can be a fun time. And that is, I want to get into a little later in the podcast, talking about some of the issues in, female sexuality and possibly pain and problems that we're having because of the aging and that not being addressed. Yet also what I like that you said right there is that midlife, we sort of get to this point where it is oh my gosh, what are we doing here? And that's a lot of the coaching I do, just sort of in general, like, what are we doing here? I've raised my kids and now what? Or, I've gotten married and I have the kid and now, looking for that satisfaction. But in terms of in the bedroom and turning into ourselves, I love your message. And one of the things I'd love you to talk about is you talk about, because we are busy women, really, whatever our age, we are very much a do society, and how sex can become something on that to-do list.
Yeah.
And I love how you speak of sort of getting sex off the to-do list onto the for you list. Could you expand a little on that?
Yeah, definitely. So in terms of to-do list sex, I always explain it as, there's so many things on your plate, you're juggling so many different things, and you're stressed, you're juggling family and work, and usually somewhere in there the self-care is not there, and your tank is low. You don't have a lot to give. But your partner is like, hello, can we have some intimacy? Can we have some intimacy? So you stick it on your list of things to do. And then you put the focus on the efficiency of that list and checking the things off on that list. And so like right after taking out the trash is sex on the list. And like you might actually be in the middle of having sexual intimacy and be thinking about that list going, thank God I can take this off my list.
That off. It's like you're in my first marriage.
As opposed to like be in your body. And I really work hard with my clients to switch from this to-do list sex over to this for you sex. And the for you sex is focused on the pleasure and the satisfaction, the connection. And I always say like, when we're talking for you sex, it doesn't matter if you're partnered or single. Like there's sexual intimacy and expressing your sexuality should be there. And so the focus on the satisfaction, the pleasure and connection, that could be if you're solo partnered with yourself, the connection with your best and most important relationship is that relationship with yourself, right? So the satisfaction, the pleasure, the connection, that's where the focus of for you sex is. And for you sex is based on this foundation of self-care, where you're making sure you're getting enough sleep, and you're making sure you're getting the nutrition that you need. But even more than that, it's making sure that you exercise, making sure you do the hard things that need to be done that you're procrastinating about. So self-care isn't just bubble baths and bonbons, there's more to it than that. But, all together, it comes to this place where you're focused on your sexuality, expressing your sexuality, the sexual intimacy is focused around for you and your pleasure and your satisfaction, as opposed to the efficiency. So the focus goes on to the intimacy as opposed to the efficiency and just like trying to get it done.
Oh, I've never heard it put that way. Moving from efficiency to intimacy, which is very important. And, you said a lot right there that just landed very well for me. This idea that, we are our most important relationship. Listeners will know I speak of 5 pillars of wellness that I have, and sleep, exercise, food, and then we have self-care, and then we have relationships. And relationships, I always say the most important relationship is with yourself. And to have that, bring sex into the equation there, and your own pleasure and how you're treating yourself is something that I absolutely never did until my first marriage ended, trying to think of like, it really was like, oh no, I am here to either make babies or please my husband.
Right.
And sort of shutting off, because the message of like, oh, you're a bad girl if you want anything else, or you're, this promiscuous, I grew up in a very sort of restricted culture, but it's also patriarchy,
Right. I mean, if you look at those, who exactly do those messages serve? They generally don't serve women, but they serve men pretty well. And I love men. I don't have anything against it, but at the same time, if we look at, the structure of society and how it's been set up, very much of it is not necessarily in the best interest of women, honestly,
Well, and I think what they're finding is it's not in the best interest of men anymore either. Like,
exactly. And then
men going up and them not being able. So
exactly.
I absolutely support that. And so how would you start to get into more like that relationship with yourself? If you are a woman and you're just sort of entering the stage and you're like, oh my goodness, wait a minute, I have needs and I can have them, sort of allowing that.
Yeah, you know what? I usually start with looking at the beliefs that we have around sex and sexuality. We might be in our 40s, but these beliefs may be from when we were 6 or 7 or 13 years old. What does a good girl do? What does a good girl not do? we're women, we're full grown, right? And hopefully these messages are not being perpetuated for our daughters either, so we need to look at these messages so we can pluck them out of our brains, but also if we have daughters or women in our family, pluck them out of their brains as well. They're like weeds, they're not helping in any way, right? So we're at this place where we get to make our own choices and make our own decisions and have our own thoughts and beliefs about things. So if we had thoughts and beliefs about what a good girl does, what a bad girl does, I shifted back to the fact that, we were meant for pleasure. Sexuality is just a normal part of being a human being. There's nothing wrong with expressing your sexuality with yourself or with others. It's just a normal part of life. And when you push away or dampen part of your life, it affects other parts of you. And I say that spirituality, sexuality, creativity are very tied together. And so when you're suppressing the sexuality, you're also suppressing parts of your creativity and parts of your spirituality and parts of your ability to connect with other people, right? So that's part of it. And I try to reframe it as just a normal part of who you are. And you get to express that normal part of who you are, and you are made for pleasure. I'm bringing out my little friend, I have my little friend, the clitoris, right? And this structure is made for your pleasure. It has no other function than your pleasure.
Many people don't know. I didn't know that until I was, I don't know, maybe 40, and just having that conversation with kids. I mean, I will say to my boys, I say, I want you to be clitoris literate. So clitoris,
yes.
Like to know it's there, to know what its function is, and that is,
Yeah, and to recognize that is fine. Like the only function of the clitoris is pleasure. You're made for pleasure. We're all born. Every female is born with a clitoris. There may be one or two anatomically that may have a smaller one or something like that, and there may be some other medical stuff going on, but
in general,
the majority in general, like we're born with a clitoris, we have a clitoris, it functions, it's made for pleasure, right? So there's nothing wrong with you having pleasure, and you get to decide and choose how you want to express that in your life, but also recognize that it's just a normal part of who you are, and it's not something that needs to be walled off or shut off or that you have to be afraid of in some way. It's okay. It's fine. We're sexual beings, and that's okay.
Well, and you touched on so many points that, come up with life coaching, no matter what the subject is, but to first bring awareness to what our thoughts are, because our thoughts, when we tell ourselves them over and over, become beliefs. So what are your beliefs about sex, and whose, voice is that in your head? Is it your dad? Is it your teacher? Is it your minister? And to get clear on whether you want, if those beliefs are serving you. But then also I love the part of, being that kind observer of yourself and understanding, shame and guilt are not helpful. And I know from my experience I know there was, time when I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that you're, whatever age, and you're just learning about, the different parts of your body. And
I can't believe it, because I'm a doctor, right? I went to medical school. Did we have any discussion about the clitoris and female pleasure? No. So like, if the doctors aren't even get it, where exactly is it coming from? It's coming from women, radical women that have decided, and hopefully it will become mainstream, but have decided at some point that they need to have a better understanding of their body and the pleasure center, how it works for them, and decided to educate themselves about it.
Yeah. And I do think, I have heard you say before that, and you said even in this episode, that we are our most important relationship and our most important sexual partner. And I think a lot of, if people are not aware of the thought model, and they might put the responsibility for their sexual pleasure on their partner. But can you speak a little more about how that is not helpful for?
Yeah, I have this analogy, and it's like, you have a driver's permit for your sexuality, right? And somebody else is in the driver's seat, and you're putting your responsibility about your own sexuality on somebody else, right? And then if you're not getting the pleasure that you want, you're upset with the driver, right? But it's time for all of us to get our license. It's time to get our driver's license, our sexuality license, and to own our sexuality. And this is what in my course I do. It's called Own Your Sexuality Now, because I want to emphasize that you can't get upset with other people if you're not enjoying the sexuality because you haven't invested the time and energy to understand your body and the pleasure and how it works for you. You are the one that needs to have your own driver's manual on your own body. To expect that somebody else knows how to please you and expect that they're going to be able to bring your sexuality out. And that's no, that's putting a lot of responsibility on somebody else. And then it's just when you're depending on somebody else to make you happy or to make you feel, you're just asking for it, right? It's about you have the responsibility. You can take control of your sexuality. You can figure it out. You can spend the time that you need to. But as soon as you start delegating that to somebody else, it's going to make you frustrated. It's going to make them frustrated too, right? That's a lot of responsibility to put on another human being. They're trying to figure out their own stuff. And now they have to figure out how your body works and how to give you pleasure. It's fun when you two can come together and enjoy yourself that way. But when it's somebody else's responsibility and you're upset, there's nobody to be upset with but yourself,
Yeah. I definitely appreciate, I mean, that so much comes up there with this back to the, our own relationship with ourselves, like how we think about ourselves and how our needs matter and how we're worthy of pleasure and that satisfaction so that you can speak up in bed or in the bedroom and like, actually, this feels a little better to me. Or, you might have seen that on the movies, but that doesn't work. Like, could we try it this way? And having that courage in a deeply connected emotional relationship where they're going to, be able to speak up for themselves and remind themselves that their needs matter, not to just grin and bear it and move through because there is another way. Yeah. And then also what I'm hearing you say is that it's also that responsibility to take some time and learn what feels good for you with your partner or with yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I advocate women actually looking at their vulva. We talk a lot about the vagina, but your pleasure center is focused in your vulva. And that's basically the region between your legs at the outside, and that has your lips. And if you look at the anatomy, and your clitoris is deep in the structure of your vulva. And that's where majority of your pleasure comes from. And so women don't even know what their vulva looks like very often. And so if you don't understand the structure, the anatomy of it, that's the first thing, is to look at your vulva in a mirror and check out and see where your clitoris is, and recognize that this is just the tip, and that your clitoris has 4 legs that go down deep to the lips of your vulva area. And so that whole region is like your pleasure zone, right? And then there is the goddess spot or the G spot as well that comes in there as well. But the first thing is to understand what your anatomy looks like. And then to learn about, and we all have the same parts, but they might be, just slightly in different places. Like one might be, you might have your clitoris closer to your vagina area. And so then you might have more pleasure with penetration. Whereas if it's a little bit further away, then you might need more stimulation to your vulva. But you need to look at the structures and see what your vulva looks like and explore your body and figure out, oh, I like actually the left down a little lower is kind of my pleasure zone right there, not the tip like I thought it was. Very often women, like they don't want the clitoral tip touch because it's so sensitive, right? But if they understand that the clitoris is this long structure and a pretty big structure, then there's a lot of other places you can explore as well. So I say, start with your anatomy, look there, and kind of get a sense of what your body and your pleasure zones are.
I love it. I'm sitting here, like, I sometimes have clients try to look in the mirror at their face to feel connection and like say something nice to themselves. And I'm like, now I'm like, yes, warriors, we are asking you to look at your vulva. So go for it. We encourage it. It is definitely something, it's a part of your body.
It's a part of your body. And I do have to say that sometimes looking at our vulva brings up a lot of thoughts. It brings up a lot of thoughts, which are not so loving towards our vulva, right?
Yeah.
And, spend some time just writing down those thoughts, and being okay. Don't judge yourself. Don't judge your vulva, but just say that it's going to take time to explore this and be okay with this, and to just relax into it and just be okay. And ask yourself, where did these thoughts come from? What is this bringing up for me? And just explore it a little bit, and recognize that this is your pleasure zone, and you kind of get to own it, and you get to become more familiar with it. I always have this hashtag. It's like your clitoris is lonely, you know?
Oh yeah, and I was just thinking bumper sticker, love your vulva. Like, how can we shine love on our vulva? It's
Exactly.
that's and it is just, it's finding that love, and all of our vulvas are different. They, have the same pieces, but they're going to look different. And so to just have shine some love there for that area, because it's going to bring you love and satisfaction.
Exactly. Love your vulva, love yourself.
Yeah. Can you speak a little of what you talk about when you speak of the pleasure gap?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the pleasure gap,
Yeah,
right?
that's
So there's a lot of inequality going around. And so when we talk about the pleasure gap, we are generally talking about heterosexual sexual encounters. We don't necessarily see this with women having sex with women or men having sex with men. But when we get into the situation where women are having sex with men, and I don't want to disregard non-binary, but when we're talking about the pleasure gap, that's definitely where we're just talking about male and female. I don't think it's really been explored in terms of non-binary and going into that area. But in terms of, if we're talking about sexual intimacy that's like heterosexual in nature, we're finding that men usually have pleasure around 85 to 95% of the time, and women are having pleasure like 60 to 65% of the time in this situation. So that being a case, there's a gap between the pleasure, right?
Yeah.
Like the men are having more pleasure and the women are having less pleasure. And the question becomes why, right? And we're finding that it's not the same priority for a woman's pleasure to be at the same level as her partner's pleasure, her male partner's pleasure. And maybe some of it has to do with this to-do list sex, right? Maybe we're coming into it where it's like, I just need to get this done and it's really not about my pleasure and the focus isn't on that. But at some point, we have to ask ourselves why, and we have to ask ourselves, do we want to continue to make this a priority? And there's a number of different, maybe it's like we don't understand where our pleasure comes from. It's hard to have the conversations with our partner in terms of what would be more pleasurable for us. And then there's just the structure of the vulva and the vagina, like the clitoris. For most women, they need clitoral stimulation to have an orgasm. There's only about 30% of women that have orgasms and pleasure from just penetrative sex alone. So now we're talking about this, there's 30%, that means 70% of women need some sort of clitoral stimulation, either just clitoral stimulation alone to have the pleasure and the orgasm, or they need clitoral stimulation in conjunction with penetration. But usually 70% of the women need some sort of clitoral stimulation. If you're not getting that stimulation, you're not having that level of pleasure and possibly orgasms that you could otherwise have. And so this is another component that is adding to this gap that we're seeing here with the pleasure gap.
And so how would you advise minimizing that gap?
Yeah, minimizing that gap is to put the focus on the woman's pleasure, at least to the same extent as her partner's pleasure. It's not optional. Like the way we are right now, if you have this 60, 80, 90% gap, then it's optional. It's like, oh, it would be nice if she has pleasure, and it would be nice if she had an orgasm, but it's not a priority to the same extent as the partner. So it is part of it. It's like making sure it is a priority and making sure that this is something that's important. And I always focus on the pleasure and less so on the orgasm, because I don't want us to get into this performance anxiety thing where we're like, I have to have an orgasm. I have to have an orgasm.
Yeah, that's a killer.
That's the fastest way to kill any fun, right? But if we could put the focus on my pleasure needs to be at the same level as my partner's pleasure, that's different. If that means that we need to have some stimulation to the clitoris while there's penetration, whatever it is that you want to do, does it mean that we need more foreplay going on here? Does it mean that we bring the vibrator to the bed? Don't be afraid to bring your vibrator to the bed. Like we have this myth that like the partner has to be the one that provides your pleasure to you. And if you bring a vibrator, then that's saying something about the partner. No, it's not. It's just saying about the structure of your body. And are we putting the focus on egos? Or are we putting the focus on pleasure?
Well, yeah, it's akin to bringing lube to bed. Yeah, it's like that's just it's another tool that can help improve the experience.
Exactly.
I do need to back up where you said that, put pleasure as at the same, like put our pleasure, the female pleasure, the same priority as the male pleasure. That again, to remind listeners and watchers that this is your responsibility. This is, for me to say my pleasure is important. It's not for me to look to my partner to be like, oh, okay, Susie, let's take care of you. It's us standing up, us reminding ourselves our needs matter, us saying, pleasure is important. And I love that. I love leading with the question of like, how can I make this fun? And how can I make this feel great to me? And taking it away from the orgasm, but how can this be pleasurable? Is a wonderful piece. Could you speak to a little about desire? Because in middle age, the women that I coach and the women probably listening to this show are very busy, very driven, very go, 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 go. And they are finding that they are not having much desire, or their desire is lacking. What would you say there? Or what are some suggestions?
Yeah, so I talk a lot about desire in terms of the spontaneous desire versus more of a receptive desire. And there's different times in our life where the spontaneous might be playing more of a role, and then the receptive or responsive might be playing more of a role. And that's okay. We need to recognize there's two different types of libido, and either one is equally good, right? We had this concept that the what is libido or desire is spontaneous, like something where your body is ready to go, your mind is ready to go, you're like boom on it, you wake up from you're like, I would like to get some today, right?
Yeah.
But that's 30% of women focus more on the spontaneous type, but 70% of women again are more on the receptive side. And if we've been in a relationship longer and as we get older, we tend to be more on the receptive type of libido, and that is coming from a place of neutrality. So when you have spontaneous desire going, you're like, "Ooh, I am ready for this. Let's do this. Let's go for it. Hey, how you doing?" You're like pouncing on somebody, right? But when you're coming from more of a responsive, it could be like, "Yeah, I might be interested in sex," or I'm okay, right? It feels neutral. So because you've shifted from that spontaneous type of desire into this more responsive type of desire, women tend to think that something has gone wrong.
I was going to say they feel like something's wrong with
Yeah,
them, or they have no libido versus
right.
looking at it.
But nothing's gone wrong. It's just a different type. It's a different way to tap into your libido, basically. And then it becomes understanding that this is normal, and that we just figure out how it is that to get your libido or your interest in sex increased, right? And so you can come at it from different perspective, where maybe you come at it from the perspective of, I really love my partner or myself, and I really want this closeness, and this is a way for me to connect and have pleasure and satisfaction. And then that could kick you into being more interested in sex, and then your libido could kick in, and then you could go from there. Or it could be you get a physical stimulation, right? So it could be the case that you have some sort of stimulation to your genitalia, your arousal kicks in, then you remember that you actually like sex, and then you want some sex, and
Like,
the
oh,
desire
right.
kicks in, like, oh right, I forgot about that, right? So there's different ways. And so I talk to my clients about what are your, and they also mentioned this in Emily Nagoski's Come As You Are, like what are the things that are your accelerators and what are your brakes? So what makes you more interested in having sex and sexual intimacy, and what makes you less interested? And the more you can focus on creating the things that make you more interested. Do you need to text your partner throughout the day? Do you need to read erotica to yourself? You get to decide what's going to trigger and click something on in your brain to get you going, right? Your biggest sexual organ is your brain. So what do we have to do to kick that into gear?
I love that. I'm reading Noah Trevor's book right now, which is Born a Crime. And he just it's so funny. The last passage he just said, his mom is always like dropping these little sex tidbits. And he's like, you have to get into a woman's brain before you get into her vagina. Like, that's so great. But also Emily Nagoski, I'd forgotten about that, how she speaks of, the pedals and having the brakes and the accelerator. And that's been really helpful for me too, to notice there are some things that, really put the brakes on my desire, having lots of responsibilities, feeling like there are ears around, like my kids can walk in.
Yes.
And so noticing those, and then also noticing what does get me a little excited and stoke that fire. I guess I also, one of the things that I learned later in life was about this. I didn't realize there were two different kinds of desire, and maybe my coach, someone explained it to me as sort of the difference, like men's desire being like the microwave. It's like on and boom, let's go. And women are more like that slow cooker. And one thing that helps me, I know, with my desire is to schedule sex. And so I can think, I mean, if it happens spontaneously, great. But I also can think like, okay, we are going to, have it on this day. And I can start thinking about it ahead of time. And I can start sort of working on myself, making sure, again, taking responsibility for those accelerators. Have you heard of, or is that a tool that you recommend?
Yeah, actually, that's what I do in my group. We work on the sexual protocol, right? So we work on figuring out a schedule for the people that are in my group so that they can get that, so they can have that. Some people say, oh, if it's scheduled, then it's not sexy, it's not spontaneous. But you know what? It works. It keeps sex at the forefront. And what do we want the ultimate goal to be? That connection and pleasure, communication, those are the things that we want, the satisfaction. And so whatever it takes to do that is what we're going to do. And very often it's about scheduling it. It doesn't have to be inflexible. It doesn't have to be every single Thursday night at 8. You figure out what works with your schedule and what works with your life, but there is this emphasis on making sure that it's there. And for women, it's helpful, right? You can start to read some erotica earlier in the day. You can start to text your partner. You can start to you might need a bath to relax. You can start getting in the mood. You can wipe stuff off your calendar. You can say to yourself, okay, today is my sexy time. So I'm not going to get stressed out. I'm going to make sure the kids are out of the house, or I'm going to, whatever you need to do to make sure that your accelerators are revved up and you're good to go, right?
Well, and one of the ways I have found that it helps clients is that, so say they do have that Thursday, Thursday at some point today, we're having sex. Then on Monday, when their husband touches them, their mind isn't like, oh, and so they're more receptive to these sort of buildups and just the general physical intimacy that happens during the day, versus what they're saying in the past is like, if they get that touch on the shoulder, they might have the thought like, oh, he wants it, need to move away.
Right. And I work with my clients quite a bit with this concept of the sexual smorgasbord, that there's so many different ways to have sexual intimacy. So it doesn't have to be like a long drawn out hour and a half session, right? Because that's going to be like, oh, wow, I've got a lot of things to do. I need to sleep. But, maybe it's like just a 10-20 minute snuggle, or, a little love, a little makeout session. Remember back in the days with the makeout sessions, it doesn't have to be full blown anything. You guys can, and you people, anybody, y'all can decide how you want your sexual intimacy to be reflected with you. Is it just holding hands? Is it snuggling? And you can talk, you can communicate with your partner. If they touch you, you can be like, I really love your touch. I don't think it's going to be like a long session, but if you want to snuggle, if you want to, kiss and have a little fun, and it may end up going into something else, but but you've set the boundaries of the time or whatever it is on your mind that you're concerned about. And then you're right that there's a Thursday night, right? So the partner might also be like, oh, well, Thursday night's game on, the big game, so a little scrimmage here and there, that works fine for me till Thursday, right? So it takes the pressure off everybody.
Well, and what fun to have that like sort of like wink in the morning, and just, and it's just, I do love your approach where it is this flexibility, like let's, and sort of leading with the question of like, what will feel good to us tonight, us as a partnership, or me as a person, and leading with that, and not getting too rigid with what it has to look like, but how it can move towards that. So what would you say, how would you address the couple or the woman who's listening who says she hasn't had sex for weeks or months or maybe even years?
Yeah. Well, I always talk about sexual intimacy is based on a foundation of intimacy, which is based on a foundation of communication. So if the sexual intimacy is gone, we need to look at building up the communication and the intimacy to get to that place where you can have the sexual intimacy again. So it's opening up those conversations, starting back with the touch, starting back with that connection. Are those things there? Are those foundations there? If they're not, then let's work on those things, right? Is the love still there? Very often we have to to decide. It's wonderful if you're in a relationship where the love is still there and there's just been something's gone wrong with the sexual intimacy side of things. And then it's easier to kind of build that back in. But sometimes you have to do some hard work and look at your entire relationship and decide what exactly do you want? Because if the relationship's not where you want it to be and you actually don't like your partner, it's hard to be like, I'm not going to be, oh yes, let's stick the sexual intimacy on top of that. You could just come it from a perspective that this is my pleasure and I deserve it. And let's just go for it. Right. That usually isn't sustainable over a long period of time, right? So that's something where we go back and we look at the whole relationship, but we are working on your relationship with yourself. So when I'm working with my client on her relationship and the communication and getting those things in place, I'm also working with her on her relationship with herself. If she hasn't been having sex, has she been masturbating? Has she been having self-pleasure? If not, then we need to start there to kind of prime the pump, to get her body used to sex again, to get it feeling what pleasure feels like. And then we work on the thoughts, right? It always comes back to the thoughts, right? Does she believe that she's deserving of pleasurable intimacy? Does she enjoy this? Does she want to enjoy this? Does she want to learn more about her body? So we work on those aspects of things and make sure that we get to that place where she is confident in her sexuality, that she enjoys her body, and now she wants to share it with another person. And then bring the partner in and start slow with touch and kissing. I usually take penetration off the table because then they don't have to be stressed out about that side of it, and then slowly bring it in. There's also a whole focus on a program called Sensate Focus, and that also brings the touch back in, and it helps couples get back together so that they can start to add that sexual intimacy in if they wish.
Oh, I like that. I'm imagining that taking sex off, like penetrative sex off the table might be really helpful for some of the listeners, where it's just sort of addressing, what would bring you pleasure here? Is it a back rub? Is it a foot rub? Is it just snuggling naked? Is it, any sort of step back in, and appreciating for sure that if the relationship itself, the emotional intimacy of the relationship is off, there's no need to, they're pushing forward with that is not always sustainable, which leads me to my question. Is it possible to sort of turn off your desire? Like I and become sort of this like ice, like if you don't use it, you lose it, and then you need to turn it back on. When I was going through my divorce, there were probably 3 years there where, first of all, we didn't have sex in our marriage, and then also afterwards, I was just much more like, how do I survive? How do I pay for the kids? How do I not go homeless? And really, I had no desire to self-pleasure or it was just sort of like, I would have described myself as an ice queen sexually.
Yeah, and this goes back to like prehistoric times, right? When are you like, if the saber-toothed tiger is at your cave dwelling entrance, are you wanting to get it on?
Right.
No, if you're stressed out, it's not going to be there, right? And that's okay. And that's where that self-care comes in, that aspect of things, getting to that place where you're okay, right? Your needs have been met. You have enough food, clothing, housing, those type of things. Yeah, and honestly, your hormones that would help you also get more in the mood, those are also the same components that are being used for your stress hormones. So if you're stressed out, it's going to shift everything. Your body knows that this is not the time when you're stressed out to be procreating, right? And having sex. So it's going to shut down that system. That's okay. But it also recognizes that it will come back, right? And
well, for sure. Like, I've never been more sexual than I have. It's a wonderful, wonderful time and a midlife awakening. And that I love it. And yet I'm thinking of that woman who, maybe through the stress and having sex as the to-do list and just has gotten into this place where, again, it's the thoughts like, my needs don't matter. I don't need that. And I guess to just listen to us here and take some minor steps to try to get back, because we are sexual beings and it feels wonderful. And I do think it is part of that whole package of self and loving self and experiencing life and the whole array of it. And, taking out your eyeballs and
Exactly. Yeah, I would agree with that. So I'd say have compassion for yourself and recognize that if you're really stressed out, then the self-care comes in, and take care of those things first. And then be curious about your sexuality and allow that aspect to come in. I do have to say one thing about going back to, if you're in a relationship where you haven't had sex for a number of years, or for 6 months, or for however long, and then there is also, this has not just affected you, it has affected your partner. So if you get to this place where you're like, I think it's time to have sex again, and you want to like get this up and running, recognize that your partner, if they have been interested in sex all through this time and you have not been, they've also formed their own things to protect themselves. So if you come to them and you're like, hey, honey, I think it's time to get it on,
Guess what?
they
Right.
might not be in the mood, or they might be protecting themselves because they feel like they have been rejected quite a bit in the past. So have patience with your partner. And this is where a lot of communication comes in,
Get a coach. I'm just gonna like, this is where get a coach. It's
Get a coach, yeah. Or oh, I listened to Dr. Sonia, she's a sex coach, and I was listening to her on the podcast, and she said to do this, 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 and this, like have the communication, so they're not like, where the heck is this coming from? And I'm not taking this bait again. Like I've been down here before, and I've gotten myself burned many times. I'm not going down here again, right? So they have their own process and their own thoughts, and so it's maybe a period of time where the trust has to come back on both sides. And so I just want to make sure that's clear.
hugely helpful, hugely helpful. And I really appreciate that, for sure. And so how would you address women who have pain with sexuality? Like
Yeah.
with sex, not
Yeah.
sexuality.
So the first thing I always talk about, I'm very clear, I'm a pediatric radiologist. I'm not a gynecologist, right? And so the first thing, if you're having any type of pain with sex, go talk to your gynecologist. And go check it out, because there could be so many different reasons. There, like it could be an infection, it could be an inflammatory process, it could be just tense pelvic muscles. There's so many reasons. It could be hormonal, right? We're going through menopause,
Childbirth. Yeah.
and so and they're the ones that are trained to deal with that. So the first stop is to go see the gynecologist, right? That's the first place when you're having pain with sex, right? And work on that, and to get that improved. If it's a matter of lubrication, then add your lubricant on, and then be recognizing when are you getting the pain, right? Is it upon entry? Because that's a different type of pain than like a reason behind the pain, than deep pain. So the first place to go is to go and get that checked out with your gynecologist. That would be the first place. And then if you need to take penetrative sex off the table for a while, this is where having a creative mind to come up with a lot of different ways to have sexual intimacy, so that you're not losing the sexual intimacy, you're not losing that connection and touch and pleasure, but you are taking a break from the penetrative side until you get it sorted out.
Yeah. And I guess I just wanted to add that if their gynecologist sort of poo-poos them and is like, oh, it's okay to find another one, go get this, because we really do normalize a lot of females' health issues that should not be normalized, like pain with sex would be one, or discomfort with it. So to just keep looking, that there are answers out there.
Exactly. There's gynecologists that specialize in this. And so if your general gynecologist doesn't necessarily have the answer, or your general primary care doctor, if go to your primary care doctor, go to the gynecologist. If it's a gynecologist is not sure, well, they will probably check with somebody in their network to get answers. And if not, then also go online and do your research and to check it out, and to keep going until you get the answers that you need, because it can be sorted out. It definitely can be sorted out.
Well, and so as we wrap up here, I'm noticing a lot of themes in here, and one of them is that your needs matter. And if you're listening or watching this, your needs matter. Your sexual needs matter. Your pain matters. And that we in society sort of push that down. Don't complain. Don't you rock the boat. And I'm telling you, rock the boat. Rock your boat.
Yeah, exactly. Rock the boat to rock your boat, right?
Exactly. And so could you tell our listeners a little bit more about how, if they want to work with you, or where they can find your awesome stuff?
Yeah, sure. So the easiest way to connect with me is on my website. So that's soniawrightmd.com. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me. I'm actually starting a new group of my Own Your Sexuality now in November. November 11th, we start our newest group. And that's a 12-week course. And we go through all the aspects of women and sexuality and having fun. We talk about all sorts of things. And that information is on my website as well. I'm off on Facebook at the Midlife Sex Coach. You can find me there, and on Instagram as well. But you can start on my website, and yeah, we can definitely connect. I'd love to
I
help.
will have those links in the show notes, and I am so grateful that you took time with us today. This show is called the Love Your Life Show, and I do, through personal experience, have learned that my sexuality and my sexual pleasure is part of that loving my life. And I'm so grateful that we could have this conversation here and be maybe some of those radical women that hopefully will be more mainstream, encouraging other warriors listening to get your pleasure on, girls. Let's go.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.